Welcome to Sacred Conversations, a place where Dr. Nicole Dolan and I, Robin Bethel, along with a myriad of guests, explore some of the sacred threads and wholeness of life, held within the light and within the dark, held within the immensity. Thank you for being with us. On today's episode, Nicole and I spoke together in conversational celebration of a major milestone in her journey, completing the rough draft of her book with the working title, The Art of Chaos. This is the book that first brought us together 4.5 years ago and birthed a deep soul friendship, and eventually this podcast, which all feels very large to me. I wrote this introduction out a few minutes ago, and typing the words made me start to cry. I feel the beauty and destiny of that so much. And of course, besides how it brought the two of us together, it is an ocean's deep calling in Nicole to be realized. Over years, it has whispered in invitation and sometimes demanded in fierceness. It needed to be written in the way life asked. And now, while there are final edits, it's here in its fullness, arriving not as a reflection on a thoroughly integrated psycho-spiritual journey and initiation, like once intended, but arriving within inner and outer landscape that's still yet to be integrated, arriving within the continued unfolding, within the chaos, and shared with vulnerability, soul, and love. Here, Nicole brings those same qualities to our conversation, where we talked at the writing journey and the life behind it. We hope you enjoy listening. Welcome to Sacred Conversations. Nicole and I are here today, the two of us, to talk about something that has been large and meaningful in our worlds for a long time. It's the genesis of how she and I came to know each other in what feels like a destined turn of fate and world. She met me as editor, and I started helping her work with her book, which we've touched on before a little bit. It's gone through a lot of evolution. And even though we've touched on it a little bit today, as her book is nearing completion, we wanted to really dive in and zoom in on the book itself and the journey behind the book. And so I will now let Nicole kind of introduce that story, the book part of the story behind the book, however feels right to.
Yeah, so thank you. And I am so excited to share today. Like you said, it's been a work in the making for so many years. So it feels honestly very honoring and really beautiful just to be in this space today and say, let's talk about it. Like it exists, it is in form.
And
So,
you know what? We get to talk about it twice.
yeah, yes, that's true.
Yes. Well, I'll just say whether it needs to be put out there or not, but I forgot to hit record. So we've actually been talking about it for about a half hour. So now we're going to return to it. So maybe everything will come out in the same way, or maybe it'll come out differently. We don't know. But
Yes. And what's interesting is in the non-recorded version, I said to start us off, I said, each time I talk about this book, I tell a different story.
you did. Oh my gosh, I forgot.
So let's see what happens today. Yeah. So, okay. All right. I'm dropping my roots into the ground.
Can I actually open us up with it?
Yes, you can.
So I just want to say when we first, and I've already said this in another podcast, but I just am going to say it again because it kind of sets us up. When we first met over Zoom and I wanted to hear about your book, your story, I asked you if you could take me through the psycho-spiritual arc of your life.
Mhm.
Um, and you did. And like I've said before, I recognized a kindred soul in many ways because we're both so intimately connected to the nuance of our experience in all these different ways, in the meaning, in so much on all these different levels, emotional, spiritual, psychological, and in a way that like that level of nuance and connection to your own experience, it comes from well, I don't want to say something so overarching, but like for me, and I think in your case here, we digest all these pieces of things so
Mhm,
finely,
mhm,
even though like the process getting there is different in us, but we both had done that with our lives. And
mhm,
so it's easy for you to take me on an hour-long journey of these arcs of meaning, right? And drop in. And so kind of in my understanding, like the book that you came to me with, and it was like late summer or fall of 2020.
mhm,
The book that you had with you in that moment, I feel like was very reflective of sharing like these deeply digested arcs of your life where like the meaning was really woven and alive and visible, and you felt the whole and you wanted to share that. So maybe that's a good place to start because I know the journey
mhm,
grew from there, but that's that space that we first met in.
mhm. Sure. Yeah. So, as I had shared before, so in 2020, I sent this book off to Robin as editor, and I felt like this journey was complete, and it was not. And we will get into that in a little bit. But just to share, with the intention of sharing, like today, the intention is to really share like the genesis of this book, the becoming of this book, right? And so, the place in which it started was I am somebody who, like so many others, has been through a lot of difficult things. I've had experiences of heartbreak and betrayal and soulmates and loss and trauma, significant trauma. And because I am somebody who does deepen into those experiences, like you're saying, and is able to use the word digest. I like to think of like process and integrate those experiences. I also came to a place with those experiences where I rested in deep meaning. And I wanted to share not only my story with others, but my intention really was to help others thread through difficult experiences, traumatic experiences of their own lives, and not to quickly come to a place of meaning necessarily, but to go on the journey with me, right? To see what it is that I am sharing and I am teaching when I say that there is meaning in all things. And in doing so, my greatest hope, my greatest love, my greatest, purest intention is that not only will healing come to many others through doing this with me, but also that there will be deeper awareness of one's story. Because something that I think you and I speak to a lot is that, and even Sacred Conversations holds this container of, we all have these incredibly beautiful sacred stories. We really, really do. And so there's so many people on this planet that don't know what that story is that lives within themselves. And the beautiful parts of those stories, and also the underworld parts of those journeys, the underworld journeys of those stories, are all part of the whole. And so my intention was really to share my story with the intention of really bringing my readers through their own stories and to come into this wholeness and completion in ways. And to speak about that, even in like more surface level terms, I guess I want to say what comes to mind is, as a therapist, I've worked many years, and I've seen so many cases, so many clients professionally, and then also people personally in life who are stuck, right? Who maybe went through something that shut them down to the world, closed their hearts, left them unopen, unable to shift, change, grow, heal. And and that's not what we're meant to do. That's not what we're here to do, right? Like that takes away our essence, our gift of life. And so I wanted to help awaken that essence in people once again, and be able to, and I said I was going to speak about this more surface level, so let me say it this way. There's people in the world who have had experiences who have just said like, "Yeah, I'll never love again," right? Or I'll never trust again, or whatever those unconscious agreements they've made with themselves. they're not living the life that they are meant to live. And so the story of meaning, the journey that I'm sharing is with that intention, right? It's, well, let me bring you through my own story of everything happens for a reason and there's meaning in all things. And while I'm doing that, come along with me and I'll help you see your own story there too. And so I felt really good about this book, right? It was like, gosh, how beautiful to have, journeyed into the underworld and to have visited all these places, metaphorically speaking, spiritually speaking, and also physically speaking. I had traveled quite a bit too, and really had gone through this eat, pray, love journey and this soul evolution, this individuation, this journey of self,
Like healing and awakening.
healing and awakening, right? And I appreciate that too, because something I had shared too is part of this journey that became so meaningful to me was so unexpected. It actually taught me, at least the way that I practice in the world as a psychotherapist, it taught me that when we heal, when we move from being a victim in our stories, which is a really important part, by the way. I never look at that word in a negative connotation. It's so important that we see that we've been wounded, we've been hurt. And it's so important that we feel that hurt and then that compassion for self. And then we move into a survivor's story. But what I want to say is, as a depth psychologist, I've really seen not only myself, but I've helped so many others move into a thriving story. And part of that has, at least for me, and I don't push this on anybody, has involved opening up spiritually. So whatever that means for people, it's different, right? For me, it's just being more attuned to being being attuned to what is unseen, being attuned to, behind the veil, the deeper meaning in stories and life and being connected intuitively, etc. So it's unique to each of us what it is that looks like. But it really also became part of my story and my learning that, like, when we heal, we also then open ourselves to the greatest depths of life. And some of that is extraordinarily difficult, but it's also extraordinarily beautiful.
I love that point that you made because I feel like it's true of so many things. When you open to what is, which usually involves a level of pain, which is the reason why people are not opening because they want to push away the pain, what is hard, the sadness, the grief, any negative emotion. So, like, they're not fully open. And so they can't receive as well everything else that can come and meet you. And so, you've got like the joy and all of that, but also for you, at least, it was like those were so intertwined. Like you opened into the pain, and as you opened into the pain, mystical connection descended,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
with the posture of openness,
Yeah,
And so it's like you don't know what is waiting to meet you and be received. But there's so much that is there, and it's kind of a matter of like your openness to
right.
let it in.
Yeah, and often the experiences that do open us, not only are they painful, but they are unexpected. Like most of us don't choose to walk into our underworld journeys. I think that kind of changes over time as we mature in soul growth, in ways. But certainly, the one of the major times that we start to see crisis, not necessarily like our first trauma, because that's not true, but crisis like unfolding, deepening into something more is usually around like 30. And if it doesn't hit you then, it will hit you in your 40s. But there are opportunities, just like in the hero's call and the hero's journey, right? There are opportunities that are knocking for you to open that door and for you to
Mm.
walk through. And sometimes people turn towards that calling more willingly and openly, and usually not. Most of us are actually really thrust into the unknown. So that's what's coming up in this moment, at least as far as what I want to share. But it's, to your point, it's so important to do that healing work because what lies for us on the other side is profound. And it
Mhm.
really is, and the quote that I love just the most in the world, and I at one point was so resistant to, but I appreciate so deeply now, is, "You must be willing to let go of the life that you have planned, so as to have the life that is waiting for you." It's a Joseph Campbell quote, and it speaks so deeply to my soul now that I have been through that process multiple times in my life.
And
Um
you are, I would say, like a very stark illustration of that quote because I've only known you on the other side of the first story, the story that you came to me writing about, which was your story of healing and awakening as
Mhm,
an individual. So I've only known you in that context, but I've heard of the life lived before. And
mhm.
it's so different from the way of being that I have always known in you, you
Yeah.
know? And so, I mean, the life meant for you was vastly different from where, what you were thinking.
Vastly, vastly different. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. There are threads from my past that are still part of today. There are
Sure.
some parts of me that I intuited a long time ago that are still connected to me and are still part of this newer life. But yes, I am entirely different in the way that I show up in the world.
I think for me, the main thing, because of course, like they're the threads that I see. I think for me, what makes it so stark is I've always known you willing to open to the pain,
Mhm.
right? Imperfectly,
Mhm.
like we all will do, but like you are in that space
Yeah.
rather than wanting to push it away and like not see.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now it's opposite.
Yeah, and I think, that may even be a decent place to really segue into the second part of this
Mm.
book, which once readers are reading this book, it won't necessarily be the second part, but since we're talking about the making of
Yeah.
it, you're gonna get to kinda see the backstory of, like, how this book became 2 books first, and then I was, like, really lost.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but we came from this place of, deep integration and healing and individual self and soul work and like, oh, I have all the answers. Like I'm going to give it to everybody in the world now, right? And I kid because it wasn't like there was no ego in that. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
ego driven, but I really felt I knew what it was like to heal and I knew what it was like to open and I knew and I could explain well too, right? With my psychology background and personal and professional experience. It's like I had so much to bring through this story and I was so excited to offer it and really just wanted to wrap it up in a bow, and send it off to my editor and get it back and go out into the world and live happily ever after. And that did not happen.
Mm.
So, at the time, I was already a mother, which is where we're going in the next part of this journey. I was already a mother, but like what I like to say is I was a mother as far as like an earthly concept would go. I had become a mother physically, just like we consider, what mother is in this world or what marriage is in this world. Like we think of that, white picket fence. And I had become that. Like I had stepped into that threshold of mother, but I hadn't really stepped into like deep soul, who am I as mother? And I hadn't embodied that yet. And going on that journey from maiden to mother was an incredible journey in itself. I think I'm still on it. But it really opened up something new. So even though at the time when I had completed this book or thought I had completed this book and sent it to you, I was mothering, but I wasn't really conscious of what it was I was fully going through. And I think, in our first non-recorded version, you kind of jumped in there, Robin, and it was really helpful. I felt like to hear your experience and interpretation of what that looked like through your lens, because I wasn't very conscious of it at the time.
Yeah.
I didn't
Mhm.
know how I was holding it. I just knew I was like writing this book, focusing on that,
Yeah.
and just trying to really survive my own life at the time.
Well, do you want me to kind of
Sure.
summarize with that? So, in our first conversation about it, Nicole was talking about the original book that she wrote, and how so meaningful it was, the story of her inner transformation and healing and awakening. And that's the book that she was focused on birthing, and that I was helping her, go through that. And as we're doing that, life continues to happen. And life was really difficult in a lot of ways as mother. And then Nicole, in our last conversation, started talking about what the book sort of became. And it ties into some of those mothering challenges. And then she said, "Oh, I feel like that's a jarring shift." But for me, I said it really reflects my experience, my perspective of what was happening in our work together. I can see that shift because some of the struggles that Nicole has in mothering relate to struggles with one of her neurodivergent kiddos, who had a lot of meltdowns, a lot of really difficult behavior, and trying to figure that out. And one thing that I noticed in that journey, witnessing, was at first, you, Nicole, really thought the answer seemed to lie within something you needed to heal in yourself.
Mhm.
And like you said, of course, there were things that you still needed to heal in yourself, especially related to the mother line.
Mhm.
Um, but you kind of took it on all encompassingly,
Mhm.
as if we can clear this, then X, Y. And then you brought up the point. It was kind of both. Like there were things and that you needed to heal that also helped you exist in that. But I watched you shift from feeling like all the answers had to come from your inner work. I mean, along with, you guys tried external things too. Like you guys were trying all the things,
Mhm.
but I kind of had the sense that you felt the missing piece was probably going to be something that you needed to understand or heal within yourself. And then I saw you kind of shift and make peace with, maybe the answer is not there. So it kind of aligns with this space when you say the maiden to the mother, going from that journey. Um, in other conversations, you say, I think, the I to the we,
Mhm.
of a journey focused on yourself into a journey that involves all these embedded relationships. And I think at first, even within the web of the relationships and family, you still felt like the answer maybe resided within what you needed to do inside yourself.
Right. Right.
Not just what you needed to do as a mom, because of course you did need to do things as a mom. You had to like try and get her this support or that, but it was
Mhm.
almost like this invisible work within yourself was going to be what she needed. And it was part of it, but it was also this huge weight that
Mhm.
you held it all, that this was happening because there was something that you had not healed yet in
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah, which
Um,
has just been, I mean, I thank you for sharing that because one of the most beautiful things about our healing work and having someone to do it with, and I do believe strongly that interpersonal relationship is so important, whether it's with a therapist or another healer or sometimes a friend. I really feel like you're holding a mirror for me, a sacred mirror, and I appreciate it so much because 'cause I'm like, "Yes, that's what I was doing," and I was so unconscious. And so I wanna speak to 2 truths there because there's a big "and" here. Anybody who has trained under me or knows me in this way is always like, "And then Nicole says this," and then she says, and then she'll say the exact opposite.
mm,
And both are true. And that's actually also a mother archetypal concept, is being able to hold both as true.
mm,
And so the two truths here that I want to speak to is so one is, what's really interesting is that through this journey, I actually wound up in a place deeply integrated and saying that yes, it is something in me. It is my own multi-generational history of women in my line that started to come through in ways that I was getting, triggered and activated by my child. It was things from my own childhood that were coming up in my body to heal when my own daughter was struggling, suffering. And so those things in the end wound up being very true. And it's really interesting to look into the mirror and see that, like, I saw that all along. Like, I knew that there was something deeper, and I was asking questions that not all parents ask, right? Like, they don't see their kid acting out or unable to be soothed, or see them, dysregulated or whatever's happening for them, and say, I wonder what that is in me that I can go
Right.
find so that I can, shift on a soul level. And so while that truth is so true, I want to say the other truth that's being reflected to me, that I'm actually still in some ways currently processing and integrating, is the level of self abandonment that I was doing. I was so willing then to take on everything around me as mine, right? So whether it was like marriage troubles, right? And I was finding some way to make that my fault or about me, or it was what was coming up in my daughter, and I was finding some way to make that my fault and about me. I was unconscious in ways because I was so willing, more than willing. Like, I have a lot of compassion now as I go through even healing this now. I was so willing to take everyone's pain around me and carry it as if it was my own. And that has shifted, and I needed that to shift. It's interesting because, just a little side note, but as a therapist, people often ask me, like, "Well, how do you do this work? How can you carry that?" Like, and for me, it's like, well, I can carry it. I can actually carry it. I can hold it in a sacred container. I can close it. I can come back to it. I don't carry it with me typically. I care deeply about the people I work with, but I also trust their path, right? And I need to get there fully in my own life, right? Like, I need to be able to trust everyone's path around me. That's not an easy thing to do as a mother when our child is challenged, right? But
Right.
both of those things are so true, what it is that you're
Yes.
supposed to do.
And, like, you did do so much work that was really beautiful relating to all of that, like, past, present, future, but
Mhm.
then also coming to see, like, the journey is beyond
Beyond.
me, right? Like, she has her own journey, and I can't necessarily fix all of it or make it easier in, 100%.
Right, right.
So
So I can best support her. And she did. She brought me on my journey. And that's what I'm calling now, for the sake of this moment, the second half of the book. It actually wound up becoming more integrated, as you've seen. But at the time, it was a second half of a book. So let me rewind real fast to, let's go back to the moment where I wrapped my book up in a bow and I'm like, okay, we're good, we're moving on, you know. And right when I sent it, I had this intuition. I really tapped into something deeper, and it was a deep knowing right away that, like, that's not it. That's not the whole book. Not necessarily like throw it out and start over, but it kind of felt like that. It was like, nope, you're not done. And okay, so I started really listening to that more deeply. Like, okay, well, what is calling, or like what am I being asked to do? What's the portal that's opening? What's the door that's being asked to step into that I'm not fully aware of, but I can feel? And when I started opening and hearing more clearly what it was, the message was, how do you make this applicable to the now? How do you make this applicable to the mundane, to the mother who's going through the daily struggle, or the father, right? To those who aren't in the place of Maiden, right? Because as Maiden, as I was journeying through, healing this wound and looking at this one and opening this one and doing this work, and then, getting on a plane and traveling to Thailand and finding peace and truth. And right, it's like you have so much space and capacity and it's just you
Mhm.
do that work to take that soul journey. And
Mhm.
while at one point I was naive enough to think and believe that that was the journey, it certainly was one, right? It was maybe the hero's journey. It wasn't the heroine's journey, which involved so much more, and actually was more about, instead of going outside of ourselves to find the elixir, to find the holy grail, right? It's about finding it within. And often the journey to finding it within is the labyrinth, is the chaos. So I didn't know all of this at the time. I just heard the message, and the message was, how do you make this applicable to those who can't just go get on a plane and go find themselves right now, right? This is not an eat, pray, love book. Even if you thought it was, it's not.
Um,
And certainly if you're honest about where you are right now, it's not an eat, pray, love journey.
yeah.
So it was like I started to really open to more authenticity and more like, okay, I've already been a deeply vulnerable person, okay, it sounds like you're asking me to show more, to speak more. So I started deepening more into the story that I was in at the time. And the story I was in at the time was really, really challenging. I mean, holy chaos. Um, I had a daughter who I could not soothe. So I believed that I was not doing a good enough job as a mom. I believed something was wrong with me, right? There was something about me, right, that I could change that would help her. And of course, we did all the outside supports as we're speaking about here, but I blamed myself and I carried that weight. I also had a marriage that was cracking underneath, sleepless nights and consistent meltdowns. And, we were in situations where, gosh, I mean, you go to a play date with friends and everybody leaves the park, and I'm going to be there for another hour and a half because my child is going to arch her back in such a way that she's impossible to get into a car seat safely. And then at some point, I may actually get to the point of just such dysregulation myself. I'm crying, I'm screaming, I'm suffering, So the level of intensity of what I was challenged with as a new mother was extraordinary. I also was going through at the time hearing messages from other mothers, which to no fault of their own, were all conditioned to, see motherhood through this one lens, right? Everything is beautiful and perfect and wonderful. And it's like that just was not my experience, right? Like I love my children and I am a good mother. And I was suffering. It was so flippin' hard. So I'm going through this experience, and it's my first experience as mother. I've now had two other children who, by the way, if I would have had them first, I would have thought I was a phenomenal mother. And so, really, really, as we continue to see this theme of Nicole's healing journey, really tied myself up there in knots, right? It was always about me, it was always about something I was doing wrong. That's the lens at which I unconsciously saw through. And one of the interesting things I want to add there is as individual healing journey, I no longer did that to myself. So there's something fascinating there for people to understand. When you become a parent, it's like you go back to school. You go back to like where you were before, right? I think I shared before you go back to nervous system state that you were in as child. You go back to your own childhood. So much chaos in my world at the time, even lovely, lovely moments, turned into very, very difficult experiences to manage and regulate. And so I was very challenged as a mother. I was challenged in my marriage. My father, who I wound up tending to, became very, very ill at the time. And my mother and I had our own, mother wound challenges that were there too, that were also being brought back up because every time that I was challenged with my daughter, right, it was just, I was just in this total shitstorm of chaos. And at the same time, mind you, I was running a nonprofit with 30 therapists who I am clinical supervisor director of. I was running a private practice. I was working on my coaching business. I was writing a book. I got myself to a place where I really had to start waking up as to how willing I was to abandon myself along the way. And that's an interesting thread in the book too that I won't get much into, but I'm somebody who, gosh, in my own story for many years felt like I was left so many times. And yet as I grew and even wrote this book, even had moments of recognizing how I was the one that actually left or wasn't there, wasn't showing up. So, I think even just from sharing those parts, not necessarily to say what the book is about as far as like following me linearly, I just invite people to really feel into the energy of what I'm sharing. I just was in deep chaos, unconscious wound, suffering, struggle. And so I started writing from this place and it was painful. I'm like, not only do I not want to tell this story, it is so unintegrated. I am writing to you from the sacred mess, right? Like I did not want to write that book. I wanted to write the book that I could put a bow on and show you the integration and the beauty on the other side, right? And instead I was called to write this very messy experience. And so I honored that calling and I stepped in fully and I started writing this other part of the book from this experience. And as I did start to recognize I was already conscious of, right, as we've been discussing, that soul mirror in child. Like I was already conscious and aware of like, at least learning or being open to what are they bringing up in me to heal. But as I was writing and integrating and growing myself, I also was really learning along the way, like how I could teach this to others through story. I I feel like it's not an uncommon message out there today, this conscious parenting message, right? But I felt like I had the ability to really bring somebody through that lived experience
Mm.
in a way that might help them understand, well, what does that mean? Right?
Mhm, mhm.
Mean that like when my kid is having a tantrum, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. And it's deeper than what people think, right? Because sometimes people think like, oh, well, it's because, and this can be the truth too, but sometimes it's as simple as, well, you weren't allowed to have big feelings, right? So your child's big feelings are activating you. That might be true.
Mhm,
It might
mhm.
also be true that your nervous system has housed certain aspects of trauma and that that is what is actually coming up in your system.
Mm.
And it's being triggered not necessarily from the tantrum or the big feelings, but maybe from the discomfort you feel when you're out of control of your child, or the discomfort that you feel with the actual noise that's coming in and you can't create
Mhm.
protection or safety, or you can't flee, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
like, it might have more meanings than the ones that are generally listed
mhm.
in books like that.
Right,
You know,
right.
more nuance of meaning.
Deeper soul exploration, right? So I started writing from this place instead, and I started sharing these things also. And it was really funny. I like to tell this part, especially for those that are like, will read the book one day and, now get to hear a little bit of the backstory. Is so there was a point too where I started working with a literary agent. And once again, excited. Okay, we're done. Here's the book, right? And at that time, the book was everything that we had pieced together in the beginning, part one.
Mhm,
And then there was like part two, and they weren't equal. There was less in part two because I didn't really
mhm.
want to talk about that much. And it was so, like I said, messy, unintegrated. Like, oh, how am I going to write like this from such a messy place? And then my agent says to me, he says, "Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to now take this story, right? The now, and I want you to make the book about that." And I was
Smaller part 2.
oh, yeah, I was
Yeah.
so resistant. I was so, "No, please. No. No, that's not what I want it to be about." But I once again, right, I met that resistance. I felt that like, okay, but let's open intuitively. Let's open to invitation. Let's pay attention to like what's calling, what's feeling aligned. Often we actually want to go where we're most afraid to go. And that's a big lesson for those of us who are learning to listen to intuition and soul. So, okay, we're going to go there then.
Mm.
And so we did. And the heartbeat of the book changed a little bit, I think, right? It went from a place of a maiden who tells a story, right? And a hero's journey searching for elixir and soul growth and healing and wisdom and beauty and surrender to mother, which is all encompassing. It's going from seeking to sustaining. It's going from holding fragments of self to holding wholeness. It's going from the capacity to really try to put life into a bright lens all the time and like kind of see like the bright moments. We touched on this once in a podcast, right? Like so one of the biggest things that has shifted for me is like the capacity to hold all of it equally, like to really create space for very difficult moments to exist in the wholeness of also the light. And I always feel when I share that it sounds so simple, but it's not. It's not,
Mhm.
right? The way that we want to portray ourselves to the world, think of social media, et cetera, and the way and that's the way that we want our lives to look too, right? We don't want to experience this suffering, these difficult moments. And so when we do, there's also such narrative that comes in. There's so many, whether it's I'm not good enough or I'm too much, it hits core wounds. It brings all kinds of stuff up in us. And so it's actually deep work to get to the place of being able to hold wholeness and to be able to hold them as a part of that journey. So this book, as you know, was once named Stained Glass, and it really spoke to that wholeness, right? Like taking all
Mhm.
fragments of self, all of those parts of self, all those parts of story, and being able to put them back into a beautiful mosaic or a piece of stained glass. I love stained glass. And so I really, really I still resonate with that
Mhm.
title. We'll see where it lands. But right now the book is currently called The Art of Chaos, a
Mhm. Mhm.
memoir on motherhood, trauma, and transformation. And I think I'll close the loop by sharing, because I don't want to give away the book, right? But the journey, the second journey, was very much the heroine's journey. It was a transition from maiden to mother, which I was very resistant and struggled with. I'm not a typical, like, in the box person. I kinda laugh when I say that because anybody who knows me is like, yeah, really? You're not?" So I felt so challenged by, like, not being able to be like all the other mothers and not, like,
Mhm.
knowing how to, like, naturally, fall into routine with, like, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and play dates. Like, it's not how I naturally exist in the world. And so for me, it was a real journey to be able to come into this other archetype, this other holding. And it doesn't mean that Maiden got left behind either, right? Like,
Mhm.
and so I think there's something so beautiful about that. And I like to speak to that, especially to my coaching clients, because I feel like for mothers, we either stay on one side or the other. And what I mean by that is like we're either really identified with that maiden part of ourselves, that wild child, not wild child, but the wild one, like the wild woman in us, the adventurer, the seeker, the deep. I hear like calling, right? And then there's those of us who are really identified with like this mother archetype, and then those who stand on this other side that are like, oh yeah, like motherhood comes super easily and naturally to me. Often, not always, but part of their journey might actually be integrating the other side, right? The self. Like, well, who are you besides mother? So I really appreciate being able to speak to that and holding that up for others to really look at and find too, like, well, where are you on that journey? My journey obviously was like my challenge was moving from maiden into mother. And the answer once again is and you don't actually
Mhm.
lose one or the other. Right. And when we become crone later on, like we don't lose any of this. The intention is the wholeness. The intention is to live deeply in all of those truths and find your own process of individuation and growth through each of those truths and to find the wholeness in all of it. So I don't want to be too confusing here. So let me come back just for a second and then I know you want to say something. So I'm gonna I'm gonna just see if there's anything else that wants to come in. Yeah, so it feels just important to speak to this book really became Heroine's journey because the truth became that I actually had to move through chaos in order to find peace within and also to become alive within the mundane. I did not know how to do that before. Like I was saying, I did
Mhm.
not know how to do that. I didn't know how to find sacred in ordinary.
Mm.
So this was my journey of being able to get there as well. So it's really a book that speaks to people on a deep soul level. It tells deep soul story and threads. It's a book that talks about meaning around, experiences like trauma and wholeness. It's also a book for parents of neurodivergent children, right? I think it's such a beautiful spiritual journey to be able to hold even that experience in this light. And it's a book of transformation. And that, at least to this point today, has been mine.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. How could you tell? Was it clear I wanted to say something, or did you just assume?
I could feel it.
um, well, I don't know if it kind of like goes back a little bit, um, but when you're talking about, like the maiden, then to the mother, and holding both, just how I hold all of this, like I think the language that comes out with you most often is the hero's journey and the heroine's journey.
Mhm.
Um, and I can align with that language too, but like how I naturally hold it within myself is more like our our energy of divine masculine and divine feminine.
Mm,
Um,
mhm,
feel like we all have these energies within us, but we have these different compositions of what's there, but then we still have to mature into it, into that unique composition that is ours. And I think we do live in a society that encourages the masculine energy
mhm,
in most things. And so, and it's a beautiful energy and it's valid and worthy and useful in so many instances. But in that first piece, like that's a little more the hero's journey, it was an amazing journey. It was you becoming so much, but it was a little more in a container, the container of deliberate therapeutic work, but also even the container of like one life event that's like, oh, you've got to process this. But then
mhm,
you came into kind of you're maturing into that divine feminine. I mean, healing innately, there's feminine mixed up in all of it, and masculine, but there was more of a container at first. And then it's the wilds of experience. Like to me, the hero's journey has a little more container embedded,
mhm,
and what you usually call the heroine's journey, and I think of as just the feminine journey of descent. It's like they both have descent.
mhm.
They both have opening into the underworld,
Yeah.
but I think the feminine or the heroine's journey, it's a little more like in the wilds,
Mhm.
of life. So anyways, I was thinking about that, and
Well,
I wrote down a quote. Oh, what?
it's less linear, right? Like that, and
Yeah.
that applies to what you're saying. Like the masculine journey, the hero's journey is linear, right? It
Right.
is it's like step by step by step. Whereas the heroine's journey really is about chaos. It really is about like how do I find myself? How do I like get to the deepest wisdom and gem within myself within this mess? And the other thing I want to say, and I apologize, I cut you off.
Oh,
It,
that's okay.
it's just it was such a profound experience, and I speak to this for so many others. It was such a profound experience to go from a place of, like, feeling so confident in processing and the world and, like, knowing how to, like, move through these difficult experiences, etcetera, into being in the us, because it was, like,
Mm.
all of these experiences that started happening, like, in this second journey, as far as this book goes, were, like, outside of my control, is what I wanna
Yes,
say. It's like
it's
I had
more surrender.
yeah, just and it was like the ultimate surrender, right? it's like I can't control, like, in marriage, there's 2 people, right?
Right.
And,
Yeah.
like, my daughter has her own path, and my father is sick, and, like, I can't change that for
Yeah.
him. It just was it was wild to have to come into that surrender, and then it's also wild to see how willing and how unconscious I was at the time as to, like, even though I knew I had to surrender, it's like I still was on the path of, like, I'm carrying this, right? This is about
Mhm.
me somehow, and
Yeah.
in ways it wasn't. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's because I mean, you did have to surrender on a level before. You surrendered to your pain, and some things that were happening that we haven't even talked about, so it'd be confusing for me to bring up, but still, like, you kinda surrendered by letting go.
Yeah.
In this piece of the journey, you had to surrender without letting go.
Yeah.
You
Mhm.
weren't just surrendering with a goodbye that you didn't originally want, you're like you had to just accept the crazy waters that you were in and that you would continue to be in,
Mhm.
so I think, like, to me, surrender is a huge piece of that feminine journey. To me, that quality, of yeah, like, in the wild, just surrendering and accepting, like, what is
Mhm.
part of it, so and I'll just read there's one quote I wrote down because I just read through Nicole's draft. I have 2 things written down, and one is really around this. It says, "The labyrinth was not meant to be solved, it was meant to be trusted."
Mhm.
And I feel like that is a big piece of, like, really embodying more and more of our divine feminine energy is just, like, moving with the tides,
Mhm.
and not like a balanced way, and like a like rip you open as needed way, like still feel all the things and just like kind of accept being buffeted
Mhm.
as you are and just keep opening in it. So I love that quote. And then I don't know if you have anything else you want to say about it more generally or not, but I just have one quote too that was my favorite just as your friend. So I'll
Aw.
share that one as well too but just, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanna say.
No, I'm curious and excited because
Okay.
you're such a beautiful, beautiful writer. So it's exciting to me and knowing, like, your love for writing and poetry, it's exciting to hear like,
Oh.
"Oh, yeah. Oh, what
Oh,
is"
yes. Well, I have to say, I'm not sharing it in that spirit. The line is a nice line, but it's not my favorite line in the book stylistically or whatnot. It's
Okay.
more like my favorite thing that you said because I love you.
Mm.
So so my favorite thing from the book in that sense, just because I want it for you, is, when you say, "I began to trust that despite all my doubts, all my fears, all the moments I wished I had done better, I was exactly the mother my children needed,
Aw.
and I always had been."
Yeah.
'Cause that's, like, a beautiful thing to feel, and I felt that too, and, like, when you come into that, especially after if you're, thinking of ways you failed or whatnot, and then, like, you have that knowing, it's
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
"Oh, everything," and it's, like, just knowing you've had so many struggles with all those things, like, I'm like, "Oh."
Mm.
I love that. And that is, I think, a beautiful thing for all of us to hold, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't always keep trying to embody, like, make our love that is real felt
Mhm.
and always do that more and more, be the most loving version, and just to know, like, we're exactly what is needed.
Right. Yeah.
So
And I think there's a surrender and an acceptance in that too, and,
mhm.
um, yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I'm taking it in, and, I can feel how it like, for me, it's like, yes, and it's like I still can feel challenged at times, right? And it's not obviously, I'm not perfect, no one's perfect, but it's not even because, I work with a lot of parents. I do coaching work now with parents of neurodivergent kids, and Often, they have moments where they're like, they feel so bad about like, they lost their stuff or they got
Mm,
really upset or whatever it is. And it's like, that's not even really my experience. Like, I don't find myself in situations often where I'm like, oh, I have such deep regret about that. It's more, I have, I still have like a projection that can get in the way sometimes of, oh, like if I don't do this right or perfectly, like what does that mean in the future, right? And so it's something that I still feel challenged with, and I feel like it's so important to just be honest about that because
mhm,
that's what this book has been. It's gone
mhm.
from a place of being very honest but being deeply integrated and clear to being deeply honest, but not being fully integrated and not being 100% clear and
Mhm.
really joining mothers and even fathers in the mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope that that can be an anchor, though, that you can remember,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know? Which I would also feel like embedded in that is like as being, um, and I can say this, I'm not extending this into every mother situation across the world. I'm not going into the complexity of that, but,
Mhm.
like as mothers who are well intentioned and do care about that, like we are still going to wound our kids in different ways. And just knowing that those wounds are also a part of what their soul needs,
Mhm.
to open into life and the life they're meant to lead and
Yeah.
their own becoming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
And what a beautiful, sacred, and challenging message. You know,
Mhm.
just to know, that they're gonna be on their own path, that they're their own little beings and that they'll have challenging times too, and sometimes we'll be part of that, and,
They
um
need their own cracks, to let the light in.
yes.
But still, it's natural that we want to like minimize the fissures
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
we bring, but knowing we will bring them and they belong too.
Mhm. And they belong to, right? And I think that's the message of wholeness. I think that is the journey, and, yeah, I think that's said really beautifully and brings me back to that, visual of stained glass, which I just love so much.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Mhm. Thank you so much for holding space today and for all of the space that you have held on this journey. I was thinking this morning, I was like, writing a book is not unlike what it's like to become a therapist in ways, in the sense
Mm.
that when you cross the threshold of like, oh, I finished my hours and I'm getting licensed, there's not some major climax until it's published and it's out there and all those things. So I appreciate, people being willing to hold space with me today and really hear this story. And then
Mhm.
especially I appreciate you, Robin, because it feels like a way for us to celebrate this,
Mhm.
it's come into embodiment, it's come into life. And I'm so, so grateful for your part of that path.
I feel like our lives are just supposed to intertwine,
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Thank you for being with us today. If you feel called, follow the podcast wherever you listen and connect with us on Instagram or YouTube at sacred.conversations.podcast. And most of all, may you keep opening to yourself, to the mystery, and to the story within you that's still being written.